Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Perimenopausal Athletes and Beyond Virtual Summit. We are gathering, or I have gathered amazing people throughout this next 2 weeks and experts in female physiology, nutrition, training, recovery. And today we are joined by Dina Griffin, who is an amazing sports dietitian, registered sports dietitian. And welcome, Dina. So glad to have you here today.
Thank you, Tennille. I can't wait for our chat, and I love everything you're doing. So thanks for putting all this together for us.
Oh, it's been so much fun. So I'm just going to give everybody who's listening a little bit more on who you are before we dig in. So I love this. Dina has the title of Chief Fueling Officer for the Nutrition Mechanic, which is her business. And it's a company based out of Boulder, Colorado. And she is really specifically works with active and athletic individuals worldwide to optimize their health and performance through one-on-one coaching and online group coaching programs. She is super science-based, which yes, amen, and evidence-informed science strategies. Take note of that, Dina, because I want people to understand the difference between what's science-based and evidence-informed strategies, because we haven't talked about that a lot yet. And I think it's important for people to understand that. Just a little note on the side. And she really takes on real life considerations to help individualize nutrition plans for each athlete. Her passions really are digging into working with female athletes and master athletes, and as well as working with those that have metabolic condition or disease. Dina herself is an ultra runner, and in her language, she's keeping her badass self going with a whole lot of strength as well lately, with all the kind of the emphasis there. So welcome. Let's get into it. I'm going to stop talking now. And I know this wasn't on like kind of our questions, but I think it's important to just start with science and evidence and help us understand that so people know how we can navigate through that.
Yeah, that's great, Tennille, because I think it is, an important aspect. Even if we just talk about the context here as active women, maybe in our perimenopausal years, which can be a huge time frame. If we think about our, the duration of time that we're alive, it can be 15, 20 years of our life. But I tend to think of science as, we've got biology and the way our metabolic systems work and physiology, and we study that in typically very controlled environments, a laboratory setting, and it's a very controlled experiment, ideally, or a nice robust research design, and we can learn a lot about mechanisms and how cells work and signaling pathways and things like that. But I think then looking at the evidence is like, how does all that stuff we learn in the lab, how does that actually take hold in the real life settings in the context? So like, what is our context here in this group? What is the evidence that science has said, and how has that been implemented and tested out? So some of that might be even anecdotal, for that evidence to show, but it's not wackadoodle stuff. It's again like that translation.
Yeah. And I think that it's really important to know that there is the value in sort of that anecdotal to a limit. But if we were waiting for science to catch up, we wouldn't be taking a whole lot of action right now, because so there's not a lot of science specifically, and science and nutrition itself has really changed in the last number of years. I would say, is that a true statement for would that you say that that's a true statement as well?
I would say so, especially if you think of just sports nutrition, whether or not we add the female arm, which definitely, women, female that arm of sports nutrition and just being studied more focused is, I would say, pretty darn new. And sports nutrition it's been around a few decades for sure. I mean, we could say 50 years or so, but that's still a drop in the bucket, so
Yeah. Awesome. Okay. Well, let's get into sport nutrition for, perimenopausal women or beyond specifically. And,
yeah.
I guess really what I think it would be valuable for our listeners is, like, what do we actually like, what should we give attention to on a whole? And then I'll kind of, maybe we can dig in a little bit more specifically if we have time.
Yeah. Good. I think too, it's important is like, what do we mean by sports nutrition? And I'm referring more to how we fuel our bodies before, during, and after the movement, purposeful training, the exercise we're doing. So I'm not specifically like an energy gel, which we could say is a form of sports nutrition, but I just mean like the way in which we're hydrating and nourishing, taking in fuel around training for sports nutrition.
Mm-hmm.
So in terms of, I think you were asking just like things to pay attention to.
Yeah, specifically like, so we're talking 35 plus, because who knows when it's really
Yep.
happening, and perimenopause might be happening. You might not really be knowing it for a while as well. So like, our bodies just you could even say aging, right? So yeah. But thank you for clarifying, the difference between sport nutrition and what we're talking about here, because I think it is important to understand there's nourishment of fueling for our life, and of course they dovetail. So anyway, we can keep going on that. All right. So give us some goods.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think one thing, and some of this just comes from what I see very often as, oh no, we gotta fine tune that, or we gotta, let's do this stuff now to support where we're headed in perimenopause, postmenopause, and aging with, with that strength and longevity in mind too. So a few things, Tennille. A lot of women, whether or not this is on our minds when we're in our 30s, but definitely as we experience more hormonal flux and just some things that we're surprised by and how that affects our body. And this may sound so silly, but it's like really connecting the dots between what we're feeling and sensing and what the body is doing. So it's like everyone wants to ignore that, or else it's like the cliche, listen to your body. But really it is important as we get into our 30s, if we've never done it before, is to take note of, how is this food actually working for me to support the kind of training that I'm doing.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think a lot of times we just get into a pattern or a routine, or we just don't even think about what we're feeling, and we just want to, check the box on the workout,
Mm-hmm.
and then hope, that race day or whatever competition, like it all turns out okay. So I think really being in tune, especially as we're shifting around things, like how did that help you with that workout? And so this is just a tip real quick, and then a couple other nuggets is like noting, just, if we use Training Peaks, or we have a journal for our exercise, our whatever logging we're doing, is noting what nutrition and hydration we take in, and tying the dots, like connecting the dots. But I think one thing, Tennille, that I really didn't want to neglect here in the beginning is the importance of protein as we get, especially into 40s. But, ideally, like you're hinting, is given attention to this stuff as soon as we can, as we're reaching our 40s. It is, where is protein around your workouts? And as you appreciate, there are so many conditions to like how much and when and why and what form of protein. But it is something that as we age as women and as we experience hormonal changes with respect to estrogen and progesterone, testosterone, um, is giving attention to that protein piece.
Mhm.
So it's great to pay attention all the other hours of the day, but
Mhm.
I would say something a lot of women maybe neglect, and maybe it's just not knowing, is actually putting some protein before our workouts.
Huh. Yeah.
Right? So it's not just some carbohydrate, is helping with blood sugar balance, supporting the recovery process before we even begin the workout. And so a
Right.
lot of that happens with how we fuel beforehand. And that protein piece is so essential.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that it's also helps get in the amount of protein that we are actually required if we have some before,
For
because it can
sure.
seem like it's a whole lot. When you say before, just because like I think it's an important question, like, do you mean like an hour before, or do you mean like, in a carbohydrate sense, like 30 minutes before? So it's, there in the blood and working its magic. Like where kind of like how much before?
Right.
Mhm.
Great question. Some of that still will depend on, let's say, your individual gut tolerance. You
Mhm.
know, of course, then we can see, like, well, we can shift this kind of protein. Let's do liquid protein, or, if you have certain food allergies, obviously we have to work with that. And then just thinking of like, well, what is the training we're about to do? So, how intense is it? Or how long is it? What's the purpose of it? So combined with your individual tolerance and things, I would say, here we go with some generalizations. Um, Putting that protein with the carbohydrate in the 30 to 90 minutes prior, which can be a huge range.
Right.
And it might only be 10 or 15 grams of protein. I don't know if we want to talk about that right now in terms of what, but it is something at least to start getting in mind. Like instead of just having your banana,
Yeah.
before your run, can we put some protein with it? So you choose. If you don't like eggs, you don't like, you don't do protein powders. That's fine. We've got a whole slew of proteins we can pick,
Right.
and then work with our individual nature. But that's about the timeline, I would say, to put
Mhm.
that protein in.
Mhm. Do you think it really matters when it comes to protein? We can talk about something called bioavailability.
Yeah.
And, some of us may know that whey protein, for example, is like the gold star of all proteins. But some people, vegans, vegetarians, or may not, people that can't tolerate dairy can't go there. So what when it comes to bioavailability, how do we deal with, say, a pea protein or a hemp protein differently, or how do we have to think more than protein, or do we just kind of still go for that,
Yeah. Tennille, beautiful question, because I mean you're revealing this other layer. Like it's easy for me to say, let's put in some protein
Yeah.
and this time. But there's so many layers to that. And so I want to make sure listeners and viewers know, like, not the protein's not all the same, right? So you just mentioned a huge important aspect, the bioavailability. So even for the plant-based folks, whether it's vegetarian or vegan or whatever you want to, classify, is depending on the protein you choose, like the pea protein, um, it won't we won't absorb as much of those amino acids as we would maybe a dairy protein like whey or beef or some of the other animal based or dairy derived proteins. So this would speak to the importance of, um, maybe some of the blends, the plant protein blends, so that we're not missing out on the amino acid or two that could be less prominent in that powder, or just trying to cover that bioavailability decrease in plant proteins and have a little bit more to kind of compensate. Of course, there's also all the other hours in the day to
Right.
worry about protein. So, it's kind of a context thing and individual thing to see, how nitty gritty do we need to do. But I would say if we're talking about plant proteins that need to be easily tolerated, some of those blends that look at, a pea and a hemp and a rice combined, or they've got two or three that help each other out with the amino acid profile, that's helping us a bit and making it easier for the body to get those necessary amino acids.
Right. That's awesome, because people don't talk about that. So I
No.
love it that you brought it up. So thank you so much. It's brilliant. So when we talk, we might as well go right into the amino acids. Like, let's just stay to our protein. So amino acids, can you just talk a little bit? There's a lot of people asking about BCAA, so branched chain amino acids. Is that something that people should be taking in before, during, after? How do we think about it? Should we be supplementing?
Well, here we go with the 2-word answer. It depends.
I love it. Okay.
So
Yeah,
there's
got
that.
it.
No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, so our branched chain amino acids is pretty popular, emerging, I'll say, not really a trend, but it is coming up on our radar right now for female athletes, especially in perimenopause as well.
Mhm.
Um, you know, I will say it depends, Tennille, at least in what the literature I've looked at. I would say, so the purpose of supplementing with branched chain amino acids, which really are just 3 amino acids, leucine, isoleucine, and valine.
Mhm.
Those 3 very unique amino acids that the body can't make on its own. The benefit to having supplemental branched chain amino acids is really the leucine component. And that has to do with a couple things. One is just supporting maintenance of muscle tissue, rebuilding of muscle tissue, synthesis of muscle tissue, but that whole signaling pathway. And that's something that's being uncovered a bit more, is that women or the female sex has some differences in the way that whole signaling pathway happens.
Mhm.
But the problem is, like, how much, and do we need it? Does every woman need it? And so I think this does come down again to somewhat of an individual case.
Okay.
If your daily nutrition is, vegan, where we may be lacking in some of these essential amino acids, because leucine is found
Anyway.
in higher amounts in animal
Mhm.
derived proteins. So we may just be inherently low in our leucine intake.
Yeah.
That's a situation where I would say, we should look at that around training, especially if we're doing hard training, long endurance training, or we just have a big training week or a block, pretty intense. That supplemental leucine or the amino acid supplement, essential amino acid or branched chain amino acid, can help us out. But if we can do, if we are able to tolerate some of the other food sources that provide us those amino acids, then I would say, we don't necessarily need to be looking exclusively to that form of supplement.
Right. I don't know if this is a short answer, but what I've heard about fermented branched chain amino acids, is that worth the financial investment if it's a little bit more because of availability? Is that the idea behind that?
Yeah, and you can get, for the plant-based athletes out here, we can get just a nicer quality of the branched chain amino acid versus some of the mass-produced supplements.
Right.
they're not, you know,
Yeah.
you're might be wasting your money. So if we're going to do it, I would say the fermented is certainly high up there on one of the options.
Okay.
That,
And if you're going out shopping tomorrow, then you can like literally just look up like fermented. That's what you need to ask your health food store or your sport nutritionist or whichever, like get specific on that one. Cool.
yeah, yeah.
Okay, we have to get out onto carbohydrates. Like this 30 minutes is going to go so fast. Okay,
Uh-huh.
carbohydrates. Can I get like right down into it? One thing that I've heard and I would love to explore with you, and you know, I've investigated myself, is fructose, women and fructose.
Yeah.
And, you know, we have this idea that when we're fueling our bodies, we want to, this has been in the sport literature for a long time, that you want to have different types of carbohydrates. I mean, different types of sugars coming in.
Yeah.
And so what do women specifically need to think about in terms of fueling during an exercise or prolonged exercise? And when we talk about fructose, are we talking about like, I shouldn't be eating a banana because that has fructose? Or are we talking about like a derivative, like a processed fructose when we talk about it?
That's a good question too. I think it is the very concentrated fructose that we're talking about, maybe not so much the banana. However, you know, hopefully we all are learning our bodies well as we age. And so if you know bananas give you gas or bloating or whatever, you know,
Yeah.
symptom that you don't want to deal with, then that's obviously not something we have to choose. So usually in this context for women and the fructose question, part of it is that load that we're ingesting at one time and how often we're feeding with a fructose containing supplement. It's usually, Tennille, at least what I've seen is like an engineered
Mhm.
fructose, you know, like some of the energy gels, I won't name names, but some of them are honey based.
Right.
And so for some of us, on top of the intensity of the exercise, that fructose, and if we're not hydrating all that well, it can lead to some like signs of malabsorption. And so that's where we can get some cramping or bloating. Um, you know, but I think again, you know, it's all individual. So you've got
Yeah.
to test it out. But for someone doing, let's say, a marathon and just using honey gel and honey this, honey that, honey, that could be a problem, but it's not across the board.
Mhm.
So I would say if we can do mixed carbohydrate sources and maybe throw in a little bit of, you know, a chewable instead of just gels, you know, that kind of thing, we can help out our gut and then absorb that carbohydrate more efficiently.
Mhm. So there's a real in my world, there's a real like, let's try to eat real food for as much and as long as we can. Can you
Yeah.
help us understand when we need to like can the real food and just start taking in sugar, like literally pouring it down if we need it? And how do we
And the
how do we
IV.
like get the IV because we need the hit and we can't take in enough?
Yeah.
Or our gut starts to be like, nah, I'm that peanut butter sandwich or those whatever. Melissa Hochschild is a pro, and she would make, when I was training with her, these amazing fruit cakes, like this fruit
Mm,
cake loaf, and it was as dense as could be. But by the end of our like 200K ride, it would be like, I can't, no, no,
can't
no.
can't do
So
it.
help us understand a little bit more about that.
Oh, that's a good one. Yeah, I'm wondering about that fruit cake. It reminds me of the holidays, you know, like the real dense fruit cake, like, woo, it sits heavy.
Yeah.
Um, so transitioning from whole food, like the fruit cake or banana breads or your peanut butter sandwich.
Yeah, like should we
Mhm.
keep on trying to have real food for as long as we can until we can't?
Yeah.
Or what does that even look like?
I think a lot of this depends on the intensity, right, of the exercise. I mean, duration certainly matters because if we're doing, you know, yeah, 6, 8 hour ride, or we're doing a, you know, 6, 8 hour run or ultra run, you can only eat so much of the same kind of food. And we need to have some variety, even just for flavor, you know, fatigue or flavor palatability and things like that. But the lower the intensity, lower the heart rate, that solid food will be better tolerated for the most part.
Mhm.
Um, so it's great. I usually recommend, if you've got a long endurance day ahead of you, start off with the solid foods. And maybe there is some variety with those solid foods, and that could be maybe the first half of the day, or the ride or the run or whatever,
Mhm.
and then switching to some semi-solid, or maybe it is more simple sugar. Of course, if we have hills, or we have long climbs where we might need a quicker hit of sugar, I think if we can, predict that and time it such that that simple sugar gets in more quickly, or before we really need it, that's ideal, but we can't always do that.
Yeah.
So thinking of the intensity that we're going, but also knowing just that solid food, it takes a while to break down and for us to use that energy. So if we've got a forecasted, when you have to pick it up, when we're going to have hard efforts or we're doing intervals, we can kind of play with that timing. Like, let's put the solid food here and switch to, maybe it's like Coke is our famous
Yeah.
liquid sugar in races, right? And so a lot of times that comes in the last 5 miles of a
Long race.
Ironman marathon, right? Or putting that in later when we just need quick acting.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Okay. That was we're almost at a half an hour. So where I want to go now is I mean, I could keep going, obviously, and I can't wait till we get to do this again. So, but I just ask you to say one thing, and I think because it keeps on coming up, and then I have my rapid fire questions, is the importance of individualization. Can you just make us like really hit home on the importance of individualization and trying and understanding your body?
Yes, Tennille, I mean, all of us are so different, but when you throw in perimenopause,
Mm.
we all have different ways of navigating that, how we feel, our signs and symptoms. The body can change differently. We can have different sets of very impactful signs and symptoms, and that can affect our ability to train, a desire to train, recovery methodologies. There's so many layers here. So the individual piece is really understanding what it is you're dealing with that's not acceptable. Like, we can work with this, but we got to uncover what it is you're feeling and what's getting in the way, what's not happening the way we want.
Yeah.
Right. And then learn more about your nutrition preferences and so forth. And your training and what it is you desire, what are your goals, and then we pile on all of our nutrition strategies that are workable, right?
Yeah.
Nothing that's unrealistic. So the individual piece is a must.
Yeah.
It's a must.
It's such a must. Awesome. All right. I have 3 rapid fire questions I'm asking every speaker because I love the answers I'm getting. So are you ready?
Okay.
Okay. Give us one moment of courage.
Moment of courage. I'm going to say to that one, when I decided to start my business, only because, right, as a entrepreneur, female entrepreneur, I'm not 25 anymore. Just that took a big dose of courage.
I'd say. Well, congratulations. So glad that you did. It's awesome. You're doing amazing work. So keep going. Tell us one thing that you're grateful for right now.
Tennille, I would say grateful for being a part of this movement that you just, even this, right? Like supporting active and athletic women and aging women. Like, aging isn't bad, right? It's not supposed to be turning into a, decrepit human. It's aging well, aging with strength, and being able to continue doing all the things that we want to do. So to support that from a nutritional standpoint is something I'm super grateful for.
Yeah. Yeah, it is really exciting to be in this time with
Yeah,
these conversations. I feel you right there.
yeah.
What is one piece? Okay, last question. What is one piece of advice that you're going to have to keep giving yourself again and again as you approach or in perimenopause, or that you needed to tell yourself so many times already? What do you just keep
Okay.
hearing yourself say?
Yeah. This is something that's stuck in my mind now for about 6, 7 years, is you can do more than you think you can.
Hmm.
Just remembering when you have doubts or, some confidence struggles
Yeah.
or just challenges, whatever those may be, physically, mentally, you name it, you can do more than you think.
Yeah, I love that. It's true. Yeah, it's really true. All right. So you have provided our listeners with a free gift. It's called Sport Nutrition Tips for Perimenopause. Do you want to just share a little bit about what that is?
Sure. Thank you, Tennille. I mean, you know, even though we were just talking about the individual nature and need for all of us to figure out what it is, to help me as an individual, there are still principles like that science and evidence we were talking about in the beginning. So, this is a reference sheet to really make sure we're checking the boxes of some of those fundamentals,
Mhm.
and let's master those and figure out what it is we then need to tweak. So this is basically a 3-page reference guide of some key tips around carbs, protein, and hydration.
Yeah. Yeah. And I will admit to our listeners right now that I did get a sneak peek of it, and it is awesome. Like, if you want a place to start, because it is just a start on protein, carbohydrates, and hydration, it's so easy to just be like, okay, now I know. Okay, now I know I have something in my hand I can take forward and go with. So thank you for putting your work into that, because it is really simple, and it is a great resource. So go and get it. Where can people find you?
Nutritionmechanic.com is the best place, and my email, all my social stuff's on there. So that's a great pointing place to hit.
Fantastic. Well, Dina, it's gone way too fast for me. So I'm
Oh,
just like,
yeah.
I want more. But in any case, I said I'm trying to keep it to 30 minutes, and that was it. So thank you for sharing yourself and your knowledge and with all of us. And until next time.
Thank you, Tennille.
Bye-bye.